I am a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at the University of British Columbia and a board member of the Ketamine Assisted Therapy Association of Canada. I use ketamine assisted therapy in my practice of psychiatry and have seen the impressive therapeutic effects that it has had on patients with treatment resistant depression. Ketamine with psychotherapy can be used as a tool to allow a person to experience their thoughts and feelings in a novel, beneficial way. Psychotherapy with ketamine works synergistically together, much more powerfully than ketamine or psychotherapy alone. Ketamine assisted psychotherapy can be a life saving treatment for people with treatment resistant depression. It needs to be available outside of hospitals, in clinics, in order for patients to have greater access to this treatment. We hope you will join us in our efforts to ensure that this treatment becomes readily accessible to everyone who needs it. Thank you very much.
Welcome to the first annual World Psychedelics Day. My name is Kim Haxton. I am pleased to be your host for the discussion today about how psychedelics can be used to heal racial and intergenerational trauma and what it means to decolonize psychedelics. Without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our guest for today's discussion. I'm really excited that we are able to be on different territories. And I kind of want to open it up in a little bit of a different way. And I want to know, this is like my auntie glasses now, and I'm like, who are you? And so I'm going to start with Coyote Woman.
Mishmin Tuhis, Conracut Canyon, Coyote Woman, Sarah's Ruth. I am daughter of tribal chairwoman Anne Marie Sayers of the Indian Canyon Band of Costano and Ohlone people. I identify as a Mutsu and Ohlone California Indigenous Two-Spirit consultant, and I am present in the South Bay Area territory. Right now, I am in Tamian Ohlone territory, who call my ancestral northern neighbors. And so I'm happy to be here in this digital platform. And yeah, I go by she, they, coyote.
Thank you. Darren.
Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm honored to be here with my new compadres, Kim and Coyote Woman. So I really appreciate and honor their experience and their skill at psychedelics. I'm a newcomer to the field, but before I get there, I want to tell you that my people come from enslaved folks in Africa, and so that's my lineage, which begins in Tennessee and ends up in Michigan. So that's I can't tell you much about it because I don't know much about it because they stole everything. So and took everything. So once I find out, I'll let you guys know. But up until this point, that's pretty much what I can tell you about that. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you both for joining us. I'm really excited to see what happens, and there's a part of me that smiles and says, Darren, when you start doing ceremonial work with some of the medicines, they'll let you know where you're from for sure. I want to start with a big question, and first of all, it might be useful for those watching to discuss a definition of what decolonizing mean. Coyote Woman.
Well, this is a word that has become quite a trend lately. And I'm not a fan of the trending energy because the intentionality and the consideration around it is not being remembered. So when I think about decolonization and what decolonization is to me, it is to break apart and to question how things came to be the way they are, considering that here in the Americas, especially here in California where I am at, we are deeply impacted by colonization. Like just the waves of genocide against indigenous peoples, for one, but just the way we come about making decisions and the strategies. So to decolonize and to unsettle is to consider what does it mean to break apart all of the patterns of social behavior, governing structures, and decision making, to come back to alignment, to restore right relationship. And I use the word to re-indigenize our approaches towards sustainable futures. And re-indigenize is bringing in and honoring indigenous pedagogies and to learn from them and to strategize sustainable futures. And so it's questioning, it's breaking down and breaking apart, it's finding out why we're doing these things. And the same, like, just to decolonize products, like think about, like, why do we have gendered products, but why do we have engage in policy the way we do, why our governing structures or judicial system is the way it is. If we were to decolonize it, it would definitely be breaking it down. And to decolonize the concept of, like, who is in the room or who is at the table. What if we don't want to be at your table? Let's break that table, put it in a fire, and let's gather in a circle where we see each other. So there are many definitions to what decolonization is, and there are many amazing, beautiful academics that can state those definitions with a lot more clarity than me. And I am honored to be in circles with them. So I highly recommend that community go and keep learning and keep searching and keep questioning, because there's more to learn than a singular definition.
That's fantastic, right? There's a lot of conditioning that we've all been domesticated into. Thank you. Darren. Oh, you got to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm going to get that, Kim. So I just want to piggyback off Coyote Woman, because I want to say that what she said is exactly right. But I would put a person or a group of people to that, to make sure that we underscore who we're talking about, right? So we're talking about decolonization. We're talking about the decolonization of white supremacy, the decolonization of Europe. We're talking about the way in which Europe essentially has created conditions whereby everything is saturated by Eurocentric ways of knowing, Eurocentric ways of being, from the way that we speak to the religion that we worship, and everything in between, even to how we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to survive in a society that was founded on the principles of economic wealth at the expense of anyone that got in the way to curtail the full development of that project, which is continuing even as we speak. So decolonization to me is to break apart, unlearn, uncouple from the systems and institutions that give white supremacy the power and the teeth that it continues to have in a modern society. Without doing that project, that serious work, all of this is sort of what they call claptrap. We're really not doing ourselves any favors. And so I think that we really have to get serious about, when we talk about things like decolonization, we talk about things in terms of unlearning, the real lessons to unlearn, the real lessons that need to be sort of taken in internally and manifested in action and behavior are white people, essentially. And I say that because white Americans are the biggest beneficiaries of a system of white supremacy. If the United States was predicated upon skin privilege, right? If that was one of the salient factors that were used to relegate people to the margins, right? And whites have really not had to deal with much of that since the time they got here in 1619, or even before 1619, but we'll use that as a benchmark date. Because everything in terms of racial identification and classification really took off in the 1600s, the late 1600s at least anyway. So here we are today, still dealing with the vestiges of this, right? The greed, the lust, the avarice, the anger, the violence, and all of the things that were sort of heaped upon people of color in this country. So we got to get serious when we talk about decolonization. For me, it's a much more academic, much more direct call of action for people to have courage to unlearn. It's uncomfortable to unlearn. It's uncomfortable to change, right? It's uncomfortable to go from a capitalistic society where everybody's about themselves to a society that's more collective in nature. We could use some of our ancient wisdom, some of our brothers and sisters who are indigenous folks here who know a little bit of something about this idea of collectivity. But rather, we continue down that pathway of individualism, which is not even rooted in science. So there's a lot to undo, a lot to uncouple in this idea of decolonizing one's mind, decolonizing one's society. There's a lot of moving pieces, but it begins with the mind. That's where it starts.
I'm feeling a rant coming on. I'm not a very good host, but I gotta say something. It's one of those things where we look at the whole premise, the future depends on literacy of the past. And when we look at the literacy of the past, we look at one worldview where there's a story, and I apologize as I offend people, one worldview about a story about a man and a woman named Adam and Eve who got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Indigenous people never got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and so there's a relationship and a worldview of belonging that has been separated from a place of domination. We know that in the 1400s, the Papal Bull, exclaimed that, first of all, it was that people could be enslaved if you were not Christian, and then to taking lands. And so it's like this whole level ingrained in cellular memory. So I'm really excited to talk about this whole idea. But before I jump into that, I just want to say this, is that there's another piece where even in science, right, is it Descartes, who's like, I think, therefore I am.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at all those sort of institutions, no offense, I know that you're kind of in that or come from that realm, that stream. And I don't disrespect all of that kind of learning, but in that place of separation, that place of, when they first came, you look at the Jesuits, priests in the Taino on the islands who thought they were smoking, indigenous people were smoking tobacco, right? When they were using plant medicines that helped them, in that place of connection. There's a Maori woman who talks about, and I really love this, I forget her name, something Smith. I will email you the name of her name. And she talks about elevating, decolonizing because of the same reason, Coyote Woman, that you said about it, that's the way that it's being used. I hear decolonize yoga and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of disrespectful, in ways, but it's important. It's good that it's starting, but she talks about elevating consciousness is what decolonization is about. And we know that Dr. Michael Yellowbird talks about neural decolonization, which I think is really important. But I have a question as we sort of start diving deeper. I'm kind of excited to be here, but how is it that psychedelics aid in unlearning? How can psychedelics aid in unlearning about white supremacy? I mean, I think we all know, but I think it's an interesting conversation to begin to have.
Oh man, Kim, that's a great question.
Right?
It certainly can, because there is so much energy and defensiveness around when you talk to this, when you're crying your guts out to white folks about this stuff, and who are the we gotta be clear who the propagators are. No one is. I know we're kind of talking around it. Nobody wants to say. Everybody wants to be politically correct and everything. You can't. You have to call it what it is. And what it is a system. Now, do individual white people that I know or friends of mine that are white, are they quote unquote individually racist? Well, no, they don't have any racism toward me or animus toward me, but they're still racist because they benefit in a society that's racist. You see what I'm saying? So when I talk about racism and that connection between society and psychedelics, that's what I mean. There's a couple of different definitions for it. So when I say most people believe in racism as individual acts of meanness, one so-called race against another. I say so-called because race doesn't even exist as a scientific reality. So I'll just play with the word because everybody knows it as race. So psychedelics really, really calms the amygdala, right? Turns off the flame, significantly tampons down the energy associated with people's identity, because this is all wrapped up in identity, right? I've been told that if I worked hard and did this and did that, then the spoils would come to me, right? I'd be able to have the blessings and fruits of the world. The world is my oyster. Isn't that what white folks say? The world is my oyster. And folks be celebrating people like what's his name? Horatio Alger. The story of Horatio Alger, the rags to riches story. He worked his butt off, and then he worked himself up to a respectable position in society and what have you. And that story demonstrates, the American dream, which you all know doesn't exist, right? That's part of the big lie that's been told about the American dream, that it doesn't really work. It doesn't even work for white folks, right? But it goes to show you how easy it is for people to be seduced, and how much people want to fit in, and how much people have the longing to belong to a tribe, right? And to have a cause to go along with that. So I think that in that condition, Kim, within that milieu, psychedelics brings a calming effect on the individuals that harbor such feelings, and they're unexamined feelings. And what I'd say is, so are all white people? So Darren, you always say white people are racist. Well, I do. I don't. I can't say that that's not true when I'm looking at it from a systemic or structural standpoint. When we talk about white supremacy as a structure, and people who benefit from that structure, then clearly white people benefit from that structure, right? So it's a racist structure. So are individual white people racist? Well, some are and some aren't. Some act on their racism, some don't, right? But it's certainly superfluous. It's certainly all over the place. It's like a invisible oxygen. You breathe it in,
Mhm.
you don't even know it's there. A
Mhm.
lot of people who harbor racist feelings have not even had the opportunity or even the wherewithal to even examine it, because they're still caught up in the notion that if I don't call you the N word and you don't call me a honky, then I'm not a racist. But that doesn't explain what's happening to Coyote Woman's people. That doesn't explain what's happened to your people, Kim, or my
Mhm.
people, or other peoples who have been oppressed by the system. We know as white supremacy. So we have to talk about that. So what I want to do is, or at least what I see the role of psychedelics playing, is in tamping down the volume so that my white brothers and sisters can have an honest conversation and an honest experience, right? A rich experience about how much they have been racialized, much like indigenous peoples, much like Africanized peoples, and
Mhm.
other peoples who've been scattered abroad in the diaspora, as cannon fodder for white people's bloodthirst for wealth and power.
I'm going to rein you in a little bit because I can see that you can go, and I want to,
I can.
right? I'm going to be like, yo, but it's beautiful what you're saying, because we all know this, right? It's all lived experience for
Yes.
all of us.
Yes.
Coyote Woman, do you have anything to add on that sort of vein, on that sort of train? Because there's a lot. I'm watching your body language, and I'm like seeing you get all lit up. So please.
My device is getting lit up. It's jumping. My device is jumping. Not even me. So yes, I'm actually going to go on a sideways teaching tangent. So there will be and are plenty of people who will praise how psychedelics can help the mind, body, and spirit, and I recognize that. I have been invited to different ceremonies, and I have been lucky to participate in different ceremonies. I didn't go shopping for them. I didn't go consuming them. I was invited in a respectful fashion. Now, what I do know is the Western settler colonial mindset, which is quite pervasive amongst white Americans and white community, is a behavior that is pervasive across all colors, all classes, and all nations. So our fellow relatives can behave this way too. So I tend to say Western settler colonial mindset because it is affluent and it is entitled. It is resource extractive, both of natural resources and of Black and brown bodies. It is negligent of the sacred. It is engaged in a materialistic, disposable society model where it just takes and does not understand reciprocity. And so this behavior is I call it both of a Eurocentric colonial mindset, but it's also now we're in 2021. It's the Americentric energy, because like there are some European community members who are like, ugh, Americans, rawr. And I'm just like, I'm an indigenous person to the Americas, and I'm not proud to be American because my ancestry is longer than that. My history has been present here longer. And so when I talk about the pervasive system, the issues within our system, the system of oppression, and that is founded in white supremacy, our white supremacist culture, I tend to say it is the Western settler colonial mindset. And even today's science is quite indoctrinated in that mentality. It is quite limited.
Absolutely.
Scientific theory, break apart, puts together, helps us understand how things are working. However, it does not account or acknowledge holistic systems. How if this thing wasn't aligned with this thing, wasn't aligned with this thing, and this thing occurred at this unique time, then it works. It doesn't even understand placebo effect, because 30%, that's amazing. The power of the mind and the power of the spirit. And it's just like, oh, it's too hard to understand. I don't know how to navigate that. And so when I think about these things, I want to point out that, yes, I recognize the medicines are very helpful for humans, and all of our cultures, all of our communities come from earth-based spiritual practices, of which many of our ancestors acknowledge place-based knowledge, understanding our bioregion, understanding our watersheds. So the medicines that are naturally occurring in these spaces, our communities used. And over time, they traveled and they were shared, with culture sharing opportunity, with trading, and of course with theft. And so we've been exposed to these medicines and these knowledges, and it would be beautiful if people could understand a respectful protocol around using these, because a lot of scientists want to break down and synthesize and create, hybrid. They want to create lab weed, and they want to create lab psilocybin so they can control it. And it's like, medicine is not to be controlled. It gifts you and it shares with you. And sometimes it's not meant for you. It's not supposed to be hyper studied and analyzed. Like, if it's exactly this compound and exactly this, we can measure it properly and understand it impacts this community and that community. I understand the desire of why that is a focal point. However, that's not the purpose of medicine. And I hate this post-industrial era and how it tries to commodify everything and capitalize off of everything. It has no respect to acknowledging that a lot of the indigenous community members and cultures that I've encountered all have informed me so far that the plants and the animals, they are the first people. And we as humans were given life to be good stewards and caretakers of the earth. We have a sacred obligation to tend our traditional homelands and to respect the earth and to be accountable. And so, yes, I believe psychedelics can help our community wake up. And yes, I do understand how it could break down that defensiveness, that fragility, the caucasity, and just that colonial mindset that we've all been indoctrinated in. A lot of us, my fellow Native relatives or people who are learning that they're Indigenous, go, "Oh my gosh, like how do I sign on to be a tribal member?" And it's like, are you really wanting to be proud to be Indigenous, or are you wanting to consume and commodify something that you've had a superficial relationship with? So I know I went sideways, however, reining it
That,
in.
well, I think that's really great, because Coyote Woman, you said a couple things, and one of them is, it's really, when we look at this, it's a place of separation, right? It's a place of dispossession from land. And in regard to healing, I mean, there's 5 things are universal for healing. There's probably more, right, that people use, but one of the most important one is connection to land. And we know that in a time of climate change, when we know sustainability, when we look at these things that are happening, there needs to be a wake up, right? And there needs to be a place through healing trauma on for everyone in different ways, that it's held, but it also has to be a place where, it's not caught up in a capitalist model, right? In regards to that, it's just taking in a place that there are things of responsibility, respect, and there's another R word, I can't think of it right now, but in holding that. So Darren, I want to ask you a question, because I think it's important about your research. What's your perspective on how psychedelics can be used respectfully within within institutions and organizations that are primarily part of a dominant society?
It depends on the organization. It depends on a number of factors. The vision of the organization, the mindset of the leaders, what their aims and goals are. So at the micro level, you might have some of that going on, and probably do in California, maybe New York, some of the other more places where you have a little bit more, much more progressive political system. but across the country, you generally have a very recursive political system, right? That's very anti some of the things that Coyote Woman mentioned in her discussion here previously. So um, and just to kind of circle back before I lose my train of thought, you had said something, and I just made me think of just the Herculean task it would take to change people's minds enough to shift their where they are now, thinking that they're the center of the universe and that the reason why they're here is because they're the center of the universe. From that mindset to a much more collective mindset, right? So where people start to see the collective as the benefit and the good, as opposed to the individual. The individual wouldn't be without the collective. It just wouldn't happen. So you have to have that in order to have a quote unquote individual, but not in the way we're talking about it. But that really has to change. But I think that the environment, Kim, is changing toward favoring these substances. And when I say the environment, I mean the popular environment. And what that means for the future of psychedelics is everything that Coyote Woman said that scares the hell out of her. The commodification of these substances, right? The misuse and abuse of these substances. Well, this is America. This is what we do. We take shit, we abuse it, and that's what we do. We're good at that. That's why there's trash all over the oceans, and most of it's coming from the United States and India. But at any rate, the point is there's a lot of disregard for the earth, and much of that is centered on mindset, what people have been taught, how they've been conditioned, how they've been socialized, and most people are simply not aware of it. And you mentioned, I think you started off earlier, Coyote, when you were saying, well, white people ain't the only ones that got some messed up thinking too. I've seen people of color, embrace many of the same ignorant, assumptions and assertions about themselves. That's right. When in Rome, do as Romans do. Right. There's a large portion of people who believe, who endorse, who embrace. And I think there's a lot more going on to that than just, there's something going on psychological with that as well. I have a paper about that actually. But anyway, the point is, yes. So it depends on the organization. Science is going to do what it's doing now. It's going to, people like me, I'm not the enemy, Coyote Woman, for real. I'm trying to use their shit against them. But at any rate, and I mean, use the master's tools, right, to shift the game, or at least to get in there, and try to explore these things using the lexicon. I am so in favor of everything that you two have said so far, and the way that you see the world, and the way that you vibe about the world, your epistemology of the world, which has been so significantly marginalized. To such an extent that we're talking about the decimation of Native peoples. If we don't turn this around at some point in time, so I completely understand where you two are coming from the social aspects of this, and so this is why I'm a huge proponent of taking white people and putting them through this experience, for the love of God, so. So white folk can have an opportunity to be in a space with a mindset of unlearning these things, because it's not going to happen systemically. I mean, maybe a revolution. They tried that on January 6th. They didn't get them very far, but it could happen again. But I don't think anything short of that is going to happen. So the revolution is going to have to happen one person at a time, one tribe at a time, unfortunately. I don't see any other way around it. So, but I think that white people have been neglected. People say, well, no, they ain't been neglected. No, they've been neglected when it comes to fragility, when it comes to having that conversation, much like people of color had a conversation about going out and being and behaving appropriately when you're around a law enforcement officer, right? Police. So this is the same thing we need to be doing with white folks. And I think that it's high time psychedelics might provide that vehicle to do it, so that we can have we can build a more perfect union that we all want, but we can't seem to get there because the political system is just too corrupt and corrosive and everything else that goes with it. So,
which I guess brings it down to around people of color, indigenous people, Black people, and being able to use this. We know that, I think Wade Davis the other day said something like, I think he said 80%, I'm probably lying right now, 80% of psychedelic medicines actually come from the Americas, which is interesting. And I know that some of the I'm not sure, maybe Darren, I want to talk about that because I want to include how we know it helps our own people. I know that Coyote Woman, I know that, I've been doing ceremonies for years and watching it in Indigenous communities and watching how it brings people back to their own culture and cultural resurgence. I'm not sure about other cultures, but I also know that some of the studies working with vets with mushrooms that has been really phenomenal, as well as MDMA and a few other ones have really helped people clear, which I think is, to me, at the end of the day, if it's going to clear and make people healthy and help them stand upright and be in their hearts, then that's beautiful, yeah.
I was
And
going to
then
mention so that. Oh, go ahead,
ahead.
Kim. I'm sorry. I was
No,
going
go
to
ahead.
chime
Go
in.
for it.
Just I was going to say that the benefits that I think people are getting are, we mentioned, our people, my people, I'm the world. I'm a citizen of the world. My people. The benefits that we're getting is the fact that the amygdala, which is really the seed of this, the seed of emotion, is tamped down, and in that process, it has a great impact on memory encoding, right? So the memories that we make, the ones that are the bad memories, we encode those memories, and these substances really seem to help with that, with the encoding of these memories and the recall of these memories, so they're not so scary. So the trauma-ish nature of our experiences, right? When we relive those experiences under certain protocols or what have you, site, setting, rituals, experiences, and what have you. We're able to sort of because we essentially have no ego while we're under these substances, right? We can be more empathic, more forthcoming, more loving, more kind, and the end result of that, when you have nothing else, when there's nothing, when I don't have to worry about competing with my neighbor down the street for the car, for the house, for the this, for the that, and the clothes and this, all this, when I have to worry about that, right, then it's interesting how much more productive I can be. And if I had time, I would share with you the differences between chimpanzees and bonobos, because it has a lot to do with that. So at any rate, I'll be saying with that.
Is Coyote Woman, do you want to weigh on that? And then I want to touch base to Darren about your research, because I would actually like to hear that.
So tapping on that, one, when we recognize and acknowledge truth in history, we can recognize that all of us have been deeply impacted by colonization and a colonial mindset, even people of Europe. They were colonized a few more 100 years, possibly 1,000 years before us, and they had their earth-based spiritual practices too. So whenever there are times that I tend to say, when I see non-Indigenous people gravitate to Indigenous ceremony, I honestly believe it's their own ancestors calling them home. However, they've been indoctrinated in a capitalistic, materialistic, disposable society, of which does not think about communal accountability or reciprocity to sacred living systems, or any form of just humility, like cultural competency. And therefore, like when someone participates in a sweat lodge and they're like, oh my gosh, it was beautiful, I want to take this home and I'm going to make it available to other people, and it feels good sharing, and it feels good sharing with other people. So, oh wait, how do I survive? Oh, I'm going to charge. And it's all coming around in a circle to our community. It's good, right? And then you have people die in sweat lodges because people have a superficial relationship. And I call it the Americentric agenda cherry picks. Even our democracy, our constitution, cherry picked from the Iroquois Confederacy. And they cherry pick the convenient parts, not having the matriarchs be the decision makers and the final say. So the founding fathers cherry pick convenient parts that suited their agenda. And to this day, people constantly cherry pick the elements that are pretty and fun. Oh, Native American woo-woo spirituality, I'm in Indian too. Yet when it comes to being Indigenous and fighting for the rights of nature and fighting for our homelands and fighting for our cultural resources, where are all the people who are screaming, we're all humans of the earth, we're all people who are entitled to the medicines, I deserve to stage off with a California white sage that is slowly being clear cut for profit. I deserve to smudge with Palo Santo because I was told that it's a good medicine. Yeah, humans around the world sage and smudge with other herbs and clear and cleanse. And we could learn about those medicines that are not endangered. And when we want to consume medicines, what is our relationship to that medicine? Are we just going shopping for a cool experience? Or are we engaging in an accountable, respectful dynamic where it is, I am grounding myself and I am checking in with this medicine to find out how I can navigate the world. Maybe we have questions, maybe we are open to that. I've been lucky to participate in ayahuasca ceremonies and whatever the rape, the tobacco ceremony. I have relatives who have experienced peyote ceremonies. I'm waiting for the right opportunity. And of course, MDMA is a beautiful synthetic manipulated experience that is glorious. So I will praise it. However, I know that it could end up hurting people because people get stuck on it. People want to keep indulging because they may want to step away from the world we currently are in because it's so uncomfortable. But what I'm talking about is colonization has deeply impacted us, meaning we all have historical trauma. Many of us are still experiencing contemporary trauma because when we talk about fragility, we're acknowledging that we, as Black and Brown queer community members, experience being othered when the dominant room might be filled with, let's say, white community members, or maybe I, as a female queer brown indigenous person, am in a room with a male dominated profession. They may not know my lived experience nor the cultural norm of the behavior. And so they've never been put in the position of other. Therefore, they've never worked up the muscle to strengthen what does it mean to protect oneself and navigate these uncomfortable situations. And therefore, how do these people get a chance to be put in the position of other? And
Kim, let me interject a thought real quick. And I'm going to say this real quick. I don't mean to cut you off, but is it their fault that they don't know this stuff? These other people that you're talking about? I mean, they don't know any more than anybody else this stuff, right? They really don't know. I'm referring to white people
yeah,
primarily.
well,
Do
even
they
our
know? But our own people
what you
too.
don't
I
know.
mean, but I'm blaming white people for this. I'm laying this on their shoulders. They started it, right? So yeah, we got a couple of uncles here and there, and and folks who are, they call them what's the stereotypes? Oreo, banana, y'all know them. Oreo, banana, apple. Don't they have different names for this stuff? Folks like you, y'all know these. If you're laughing about it or you're giggling about it, audience at home, then you know what I'm talking about because you've heard it before, right? So, and I think that's all I wanted to say, Cowdy Woman, is that I think that in white people's defense, you're never going to hear me say it very often, but I think because of my experiences, I can understand that white Americans just don't know. They've not been taught purposefully,
Honor truth and
not
history.
taught.
We need to honor truth and
And,
history.
and if they knew where to find it, the world has told them that their language and their history is truth and history, right? And
I
so
think
how do you interrupt that? How do you interrupt that? And one of the ways I see is psychedelics. That's one of the ways to interrupt that thinking because it's not right. So when I'm saying, for instance, they need to post it, they need to do this and do that. They have no idea what they need to do. You need to teach them what to do, right? But before you do that, we need a lot more MDMA because the patients we need, because the shit we have to go through to teach it is murder. I mean, they're not necessarily a great audience, white people. I love y'all, but y'all not always a great audience.
I think
These are touchy feely things that are very painful that cut to the center. I know. So, anyway, sorry, Kim. Go ahead.
I think we can agree that we live in a culture of make believe, and that includes everybody. And I'm like I live north, so I'm like in America, but it is too here in Canada as a state, and we live in occupied territories where the oppression and continues, and there's a whole place. We know how everything is connected. We know that in indigenous philosophies, everything is connected: air, fire, water, you and I, it's radio waves going through, and it's, but we live in a place where we've people have subscribed to a culture of make believe that upholds certain ideologies and values, which is uh, propelled by a capitalist patriarchal engine. And we know also that some people get dropped out of it because they see it for what it is and can stand out of it, you know, because you've been marginalized, because you've been at place, other people want to be a part of it, and it continues. I think it's really important. I mean, because I think the three of us could be, we're all on the same sort of like, yeah, you know, in regard to, you know, abolishing and deconstructing those sort of white supremacy ideologies. And I think, and it really is about looking inward for everybody, you know, and I think that the part of the work of medicines is bringing us in here, you know, inside, because that's really where the work is, you know, because it's like I always like to use the analogy of arrows or darts that we hold in our bodies from life's experiences, whether it's family, culture, society, because of race, gender, all of those things. And our work is here, and understanding that we're not separated, you know. I could keep on going on that one, but I don't want to. I just want to, because our time is thing. And Darren, I'm really kind of interested in what's your research about? Like, I don't understand that. So please.
Well, okay, I'll go there. So it really is about what we've been talking about. I think I think we're all speaking. We're kindred spirits. We're speaking to each other's souls. So this research is looking at racial trauma, right, and the experiences that African Americans in particular in Memphis, Tennessee, have dealing with the police, having a loved one that was shot by the police, and the ramifications for that, right? So it's not just the individuals who are involved; it's their families, it's the whole community in which the shooting occurred. So throughout the whole state, not just in that local. So it's it has enormous ramifications in terms of its impact on people's development of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So what I'm looking at is racial trauma as a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So rarely does a person have a racialized experience and they have a and they have a post-traumatic stress moment, right? That's more rare than it is a common thing. So it's the cumulative effect of racial events that occur over time that can be a tipping point for someone to develop PTSD. And so in saying that, we're using police encounters as part of our inclusion criteria. We want to randomly sample a group of 35 African Americans who meet all the inclusion criteria for trauma, and all the different scales and the different instruments that we're using to determine that. Then once we get them randomized, we're doing two things. We're putting one group in the MDMA arm, the second group in what's called a neurofeedback arm. If anybody knows what neurofeedback is, essentially it's biofeedback for the brain, right? So we use electrical electrodes on the brain, and we actually use fancy computers, and we train the brain to literally sit down, stay here, come like a dog. And the brain learns. It's a learning instrument. That's what AI is. It's a learning instrument. So we're using both modalities. We know that MDMA assisted therapy works. There's been a lot of studies that have been published recently. You guys have seen some of the really interesting ones, some of the really profound ones published in these Western people's medical journals, Coyote Woman. The big one being JAMA. JAMA being the big one, right? JAMA comes out with a big article on psychedelics, and they say, hey, this works. We need to be looking at this. And all of a sudden everybody goes, wow, JAMA says it works. So that's kind of how medicine is. One big journal endorses it, then sort of the medical community takes notice. All of a
sudden, Western science acknowledges new studies, validating.
They stand up and go, how can we monetize this? Right, that kind of starts. So I'm looking at, does neuro-assisted therapy using neurofeedback therapy, do we get the same benefit than if they were doing regular talk therapy, talk guided therapy, coaching in their sessions? And we want to know if there's some differences there between the two therapeutic modalities, one being electrical, the other one being human talk. And the impact is hugely different, right? So the neurofeedback piece is looking at the electrical properties of the brain and how the brain works, the frequencies of the brain. And you mentioned intergenerational, Coyote Woman, a minute earlier. I want to say this about that real briefly, is that we know that the transmission of pain bodies, right, that go from one person to the next, has a lot to do with the electrical properties of the brain and the way the brain is firing and the way that the frequencies of the brain are within their normal ranges. If they're not firing correctly, then there's encoding that takes place within those frequencies themselves that are transmitted to the next generation. So if we can disrupt this transmission, we can do it two ways. One, we can do it through, you can't do it through talk therapy. It's got to be either chemical or it's got to be something dealing with the electrical properties of the brain. So either through psychedelics or through feedback or fMRI neurofeedback or some other modality where you manipulate the way the frequency of the brain's the way the frequency of the brain operates. So that's what we're doing. We want to see which one is better, which one is worse in a cohort of individuals who have been diagnosed with symptoms of PTSD, particularly race-based PTSD. If we can show some efficacy, which I believe we will. My hypothesis is we'll show some efficacy because we've already seen it in white folks. I don't see anything being any different in this community. We want to see if this can be the first step towards some significant healing. So each cohort will get 3 doses of MDMA over a 3-month period, and we'll evaluate how their sessions go at each turn, using both neurofeedback and regular conventional talk to therapy or coaching, if you will. Some of the things that you folks do when you go through your rituals, your tribal rituals and indigenous practices that you go through, that you spirit people through these experiences. There's someone, a shaman or someone who's leading these ceremonies, I would imagine, at least in some indigenous cultures. And so much like that, and you say these people who are going through these experiences, it's an internal thing. It certainly is, but they have to go with intention. They have to go with purpose. They can't just show up and say, hey, oh, I'm here. No, they have to really go with a purpose and an intent. And I think when that happens, the experience is so much more rewarding and so much more enriching. So Coyote Woman, maybe you could tell us about your MDMA experience. You spoke so highly of it. Maybe you can give us a little detailed version, maybe on one of those other platforms, so no one's listening. The government's been listening lately with that bust that they did across the country.
Yeah, they want to get me in trouble. The legalities of all these things.
They need to just legalize it, and then that solves the problem right there.
Right.
No issues, no harassment of Black and brown people, right? All is good, all is well. But they can never make up for the huge number of incarcerations, the innocent slaughtering of people on death row. So that's another story. But that's what I'm doing, and I'm so excited, Kim, because we don't have a lot of studies where we have large bodies of people of color participating. So believe it or not, y'all might find this interesting, but my next foray, my next endeavor is to go to the Four Corners in Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, that region, and replicate the same study with the Navajo Nation there, because there's a lot of pain and suffering in that nation as well. So I spent 3 years working on the Navajo Nation as a primary care provider, and it was such an enriching experience. I was privileged enough and honored enough to go to several ceremonies, and I can honestly say those are my people. So yes, so that's my ambition. My ambition is to bring this medicine to urban America, particularly for Black and brown people and for white people who I think are in desperate need of it as well.
I think, my brain kind of goes, yes, absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. And, I immediately am filled with, I really think it's important to bring medicine and healing to BIPOC people, right? And but there's an issue of access, because we know that we know that racism is a public health crisis, right? Well, especially, the cost of stuff down there is stupid, that you can't be a healthy country, you know? And then you look at the war on drugs, which is like, I mean, that's really, really old. That's since first contact, right? That continuation of that. How, and when you look at initiatives and drug policies that are there right now, which I think are good, but I don't know how this is a question exactly, but I'm just kind of like, how do we actually get it out there? And it is through policy, I guess, not just shallow policies. I'm answering my own question, I guess, but do you know what I mean? And or maybe it's just through academic research, which drives me crazy. So no offense, because it has to be quantified in that way, which that's the part that bothers me. So how do we ensure
that's the way
how do we ensure access?
That's the way they make knowledge. That's the way knowledge is produced in a European way, right? It's through testing, rigor, replication. It's through these scientific principles that Europeans have developed. So that's how they do it. Other people do it differently, but unfortunately, our way is not valued, sadly.
Right. Well, I think that's the piece there that makes me go into this next part, which I think about. They just, up here in Canada, they just created a course that you can become an assisted person with medicines, and it's a 2-year university course. And I'm like, are you joking? My teacher has 50 years. It negates his 50 years of ceremonial experience. And other people in cultures and communities that I know, some of the folks I've hung out in the Amazon, or in that area, where I'm just like, same, I would never pretend that or take that on. And so that's like, I'm worried about that, and I've seen people in like white people, particularly in ceremonies, and I know I'm putting myself on the limb, but whatever, holding ceremonies, and I'm just like, wow, this is so McDonald's, fast, without any sort of cultural bringing. And so how do we ensure, like, I don't even know how the question, I'm not comfortable with this question. I just got to say this, but the question is, how do we ensure that BIPOC people get this medicine? And then my thing is, how do we ensure that it's actually served by people, also BIPOC people,
Well, I just,
sorry.
Well, go ahead, please.
Coyote Woman, I want to hear you.
Competency, because when we think about how you just said, we validate the academic purview in saying, if they take this, if they study this and they they focus their mastery in this arena, they're the ones creating the rules, they're the ones creating the parameters, they're the ones following their supposed protocols. We need to instill our protocols inside that as well. And I've been pushing for cultural competency, cultural sensitivity training, because I was just a part of a conversation called Queering Psychedelics. And in these realms, how some queer community members do not feel safe in these environments, from as suffering trauma, violation of the body, violation of the spirit, and then having a Western settler say, "Oh, we're gonna engage in this MDMA treatment, or we're gonna offer you this psilocybin experience, and you have to be between these ages, and you have to take it this way, and in this sterile environment." And when it comes to ceremony and holistic practitioners, Indigenous peoples are labeled shaman. No, one culture, one community got labeled shaman. And thanks to Western academia that spread all around, we're devalued as doctors. We're devalued as holistic practitioners, as healers. No, it's woo-woo Native American or Indigenous shaman. I'm not going off on you, because you said, I just remembered that I'm passionate about this element, because it's Western science dismissing Indigenous science. It's science dismissing our doctors, our healers, our practitioners, because it doesn't understand the way we navigate. And so the way I think we should attempt to navigate it is push our protocols into that environment as well, by saying we are communally holding a standard of cultural competency, and cultural competency includes the Jedi movement, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. No, let's talk about cultural competency and spiritual wellness. And then just ensure that the people who are getting that 2 years, getting that the validity is just saying this plus this will help you navigate this better. Because if we can't change the rules, if we can't heighten the protocols, we can't heighten those, the most we can do is engage in cultural recognition, in recognizing each other and holding each other to a higher standard by saying, yes, we recognize your lovely little parchment certificate. However, we really like when people navigate with these extra protocols and parameters and blah, 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 you know, all those phrasings. Because, yeah, I want to shift policy. I want to heighten those standards. I want to raise the bar, recognizing the rights of nature, putting some actual teeth to UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, all of that. And it's a slow process. However, yeah, if you check out Queering Psychedelics, that was hosted at the Brava Theater, and it was a really fun experience witnessing community members talk delicately, because it was both grassroots and I'll call it like industrial professional environment. So we had doctors talking about the solid tests and the right rigorous expectations and parameters we have to navigate, and then we have the underground saying, so we test this and we navigated this all illegally, but we did so on our own time. And like, I'm not telling you to do it, but at the same time, if you do these things, this is the best way to go about it. And so we had grassroots all the way to professionals all in the same room, and it was beautiful because it was a culture sharing opportunity, and people got to witness truth and history by hearing people's lived experiences, as well as understanding the history of how these things got to here, or how things are regulated, or people were punished for doing the exact same thing that people are now being rewarded for. That feels a little I don't know, hypocritical, but what I'm trying to say is, when we honor truth and history, looking at all the ugly layers, we can find ways to navigate, ways to honor the past to shape the future. So yeah, sorry I interrupted you, Darren.
No, and to get the right audience too, Coyote Woman, right? To get in front of the audience, if you're listening to this passionate, wonderful advocate for all the things that she's been talking about, you need to hire her, donate money to her causes. I mean, that's the only way we get the. If you want to make a difference, here's my appeal to the audience. I'm not sure how many is on this who will be to see this, but here's my appeal. We need money, and a lot of it, to enact these things, to make these sorts of changes, to get into people's ears, politicians' ears, or people who are in high level places, to be able to get the voices that need to be heard to the right people with enough frequency. Then we can start to slowly change things. But it's like, you know, how do you eat an elephant in this country? One bite at a time, right? This takes forever. I think the revolution is so much better and so much faster, but the problem is this is not going to happen. I just don't see it happening. So we have to work within the system, unfortunately. So in saying that about Coyote Woman's organization and maybe even Kim's organization, I'm going to make the same plea for my study. So I'm working, I hope to work with MAPS, and this is going through MAPS, is the organization that you all know probably well. If you don't, just look them up on the internet. And so MAPS has said that they have made a commitment to diversity and inclusion. How'd you do it, Coyote Women? Diversity and inclusion. They've made a commitment. Don't y'all get mad at me, MAPS. Don't get mad, MAPS. I'm just saying that's what Coyote Women was talking about. I just wanted to say that, but you know, I want to work with you still. So what we're trying to do is get donors, people to put their money where their mouth is, who want to see these sorts of things go. And then once we get a war chest of money, we need a war chest, then maybe we can start to make some significant inroads and changes down the road. But until then, Coyote Woman, you know, I keep saying this because I just, you know, that's my sister right there, y'all. We gotta keep doing that MDMA. We gotta keep doing mushrooms so we can survive the mental this. So we don't devolve into angry folks.
Right.
Some humanity still, because this is hard work. It's been, you know what? I haven't gotten any love for this. You know, in fact, I get ran out of more places than I do invited in, because I simply speak truth to power, and some people don't want to hear that. So I think that, you know, we need to, if we can put mushrooms in the water, we should. If we should have people, you know, go by at the store and take a hit or two a day, we should do it. If it makes people nicer, it makes people more human, That's one. That's just. But the other thing we got to follow up with making more things more equal. Did you guys see the ProPublica report, by the way, of the richest people in the country and how much they pay in taxes? Did you see that? It was just released today. The ProPublica did it. They got some inside. Someone sent them some taxes of rich people, Elon Musk and all these other folks, and they hardly pay any taxes. The vast majority of Americans that pay taxes are people like us, middle class, working class people. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. You cannot have true equality until things are more equal, like they are in certain other European style countries. So we have to. So in my opinion, we have to throw a lot of money at it, and we have to give people like you opportunities, and people like myself and Kim and others opportunities to do the important work that they're doing, because it costs money to do it. And so that's my plea to the audience: give and donate.
Beautiful. Yes, money, that weird thing. We're coming to a close. There's lots of, there's so much to talk about in these realms, and so maybe what would be for your wish for for psychedelics? What's your wish for the future on psychedelics? And Coyote Woman, what will your ancestors tell you?
We need to respect the medicine. The medicine comes to us and is shared with us for a purpose. So we need to humble ourselves in working with it. And I believe that this medicine has made itself known and points out, because I'll point out that tiny little, when I was at Queering Psychedelics, there were people talking about like policing medicines, like you shouldn't have it over here, shouldn't have it over there, shouldn't do it. And I agree, where when it comes to people capitalizing off of it with disregard to how it is, I don't like when people just capitalize off of it. However, someone brought up the other side. Do you think that the medicine wants to be known and witnessed and heard from? Like, the medicine is making a clear, strong message to the community that it wants to be shared, or it's such a powerful experience that it can help. And so to me, it's a combo package. We need to engage in culturally competent approaches of respect and reciprocity to these plant medicines. We need to respect the cultures and the communities, the original places that they come from, and how we should navigate sharing that medicine and the knowledge with it. So helping people honor truth and history when navigating it and setting their intentions, and then talking about accessibility in combating a white supremacist culture that has commodified, capitalized, extracted, disrespected, disregarded, dismissed, and continuously benefits in a disgusting regard. And so combat that system, respect, reciprocity, accountability, and humility. So a combo package of multifaceted fronts. So yeah, let's talk about accessibility and share that medicine the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Darren, do you have...
Sure. Sorry. I agree with you. Share. So the organizations like MAPS and other entities out there who are doing work on this, and they have patents on this, it's really their responsibility to make this accessible to people, who otherwise wouldn't have any way to get it or even pay for it, for that matter. So hopefully that's something that's on the horizon. So we need voices like us, right, out there doing this kind of work, and organizations having the courage to, and the good sense to hire us to do these things, right? So that's my hope for the future. In addition to that, we need more love in the world. We need more mushrooms, and we need more mind-altering substances that help us to get to that beloved community that Dr. King talked about. I don't think we can do it through praying ourselves, into it, or just doing good deeds. People do good deeds all day long, but they're not getting anywhere. So I think as a system, as a structure, as a society, we've got to do more. And if these substances are available to help us to alleviate so much suffering, that people experience, just living in an industrial society, just living in a society like ours, is cutthroat, dog eat dog. It's not for the faint of heart. And if we compare our country to let's say Finland or the Netherlands or even Canada, right? These are largely white countries. They're doing way better than we are. Way better. They have a much greater social safety network in their system than we do. So the United States is dog eat dog. It's just the way that we are as a society. We got to change that. There seems to be some in younger generations coming up. There seems to be some much more greater pressure for that. But until conservative folks and politics, I say conservative because that's pretty much who's keeping up all the riffraff in the country is conservatives. I'm just can't get if no one's going to say it, I'll say it. We need to get rid of folks like that in office. We got to get more people in there who are humane. And so how do we get people to be humane? We got to talk to them. And, and I get tired of talking to people because they don't want to hear what I got to say. Especially when it comes to I don't care how many MDs, PhDs, or whatever you got behind your name. If you look like me, nobody's trying to hear what you got to say. Or if you look like you guys, nobody's trying to hear what you got to say. So we got to get past that. And much of that is conditioned. It's been socialized. But how do we get there? In my opinion, it's psychedelics. I see that as an option, a huge option.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Right. It is about that place of how can we reconnect? And it seems to me that a lot of those conservative people look kind of like they're at their last part of their journey in their life anyways. They seem to be a little bit older.
Please.
Bless them when they leave their earth suits and carry on and be like,
Peace.
Wait a second.
Deuces.
Right. And
keep up so much unnecessary hell in this country.
And so we're in a place where there is change, where we're seeing the change of systems and structures, and good or bad, we're in a place of change. And there's so many people doing good work. And I want to thank both of you for the good work that you're doing out there. I want to thank your families and your relatives and your ancestors for these moments that brought you into being to do this good work. I want to thank all the people behind the scenes who are helping make this day happen. Such a good discussion. Decolonizing psychedelics and healing racial trauma. It's such a important conversation. I think, this is organizations, MAPS or other organizations, really need to be mindful going forward that they're not, holding up the same sort of system that causes the problems, and that is integral, that it's, not just tokenizing people into positions, that they really do their work. And what does that look like? Thank you for your knowledge and everything, and all the sponsors of World Psychedelic Day. I just want to say, yes, like my hands up to everyone, and thank you for being here.